The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as Catherine stood at the window of her private study. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the medical report that would change everything. The words on the paper seemed to blur together, but their meaning was crystal clear. The doctors had been direct, almost clinical in their delivery of the news that would shake the very foundations of the royal family. William found her there an hour later, still standing at the same window, the report now crumpled in her white-knuckled grip. He had been looking for her everywhere after their private secretary mentioned she had received an urgent medical consultation. The moment he saw her face, he knew their world was about to shift dramatically. "Catherine?" His voice was soft, filled with the kind of concern that only comes from years of deep love and partnership. She turned to face him, and he saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before, a mixture of fear, determination, and profound sadness. She handed him the report without saying a word. William read it twice, his face growing paler with each line. The diagnosis was serious, the prognosis uncertain, and the treatment would be grueling. This wasn't just about Catherine's health. It was about their family, their duties, and their future together. "How long have you suspected?" William asked, setting the papers aside and reaching for her hands. They were cold, despite the warm morning light streaming through the windows. "A few weeks," Catherine admitted. "I kept telling myself it was just stress, just the demands of royal life. But when the symptoms got worse, I knew I couldn't ignore them anymore." Her voice was steady, but William could hear the underlying tremor of emotion she was trying to suppress. They talked for hours that morning, discussing not just the medical implications, but what this would mean for their children, for their royal duties, and for the monarchy itself. Catherine had always been the steady presence beside William, the one who seemed unshakable in her commitment to their roles and responsibilities. Now, facing this challenge, she was more determined than ever to handle it with the same grace and dignity she brought to everything else. The decision to keep the diagnosis private, at least initially, was not an easy one. They both understood that news of Catherine's condition would send shockwaves through the Commonwealth and beyond. But they also knew they needed time to process this themselves and to prepare their children for the difficult journey ahead. Over the following days, Catherine threw herself into research about her condition. She read medical journals, consulted with specialists from around the world, and explored every possible treatment option. William watched with a mixture of admiration and concern as she approached this challenge with the same methodical preparation she had always brought to her royal duties. The children sensed something was different, though Catherine and William tried their best to maintain normalcy. George, being the oldest, was the most perceptive. He noticed his mother's frequent doctor visits, the hushed conversations that stopped when he entered a room, and the way his father seemed to hover protectively around Catherine more than usual. It was during this uncertain time that Camilla began to show her true colors. While William and Catherine were grappling with this private crisis, Camilla was positioning herself strategically within the royal hierarchy. She had always been ambitious, but now she saw an opportunity that she couldn't ignore. The first sign came during a family gathering at Balmoral. Catherine, who was experiencing some of the early effects of her condition, needed to rest more frequently. She excused herself early from dinner, and William accompanied her, as he had been doing more often lately. Camilla watched them go with an expression that was difficult to read, but there was something calculating in her gaze. Later that evening, Camilla cornered Charles in his study. "We need to discuss the implications of Catherine's situation," she said bluntly. Charles, who had been nothing but supportive since learning of Catherine's diagnosis, looked at his wife with confusion. "What implications? Catherine is family, and we support family through difficult times," Charles replied, his tone suggesting that should be the end of the discussion. But Camilla pressed on. "I'm thinking about the monarchy, about continuity, If Catherine becomes unable to fulfill her duties, there will be a vacuum that needs to be filled. The people will look for stability, for someone who can step up and provide the leadership they expect from the royal family. Charles stared at his wife, beginning to understand the direction of her thoughts. Catherine is receiving the best medical care available. There's every reason to believe she will recover and continue her duties. But what if she doesn't? Camilla asked, her voice taking on a harder edge. What if this condition progresses? What if she becomes too ill to function as the future queen? Someone needs to be prepared to fill that role. The conversation that night marked the beginning of a subtle but significant shift in the family dynamics. While William and Catherine were focused on her health and their family, Camilla began quietly building alliances and positioning herself as the reliable, healthy alternative for the monarchy's future. Catherine's treatment began in earnest, with regular visits to specialists in London. She insisted on maintaining as many of her royal engagements as possible, partly out of duty and partly because the work gave her a sense of normalcy and purpose during an uncertain time. William accompanied her whenever he could, often rearranging his own schedule to be by her side. The public began to notice subtle changes. Catherine appeared thinner at public events, and there were occasions when she seemed to tire more easily. The royal press office managed these observations carefully, citing busy schedules and the natural demands of royal life. But speculation began to build in the media and among royal watchers. It was during this period that Camilla made her first public power play. At a major charity gala that Catherine was too unwell to attend, Camilla stepped in at the last minute. Instead of simply representing the family in Catherine's absence, she used the opportunity to deliver a speech about leadership, continuity, and the importance of having reliable figures in times of uncertainty. The speech was widely praised in the press, with many commentators noting Camilla's poise and authority. But those within the royal circle understood the subtext. Camilla was positioning herself not just as a substitute, but as a potential replacement. William was furious when he learned about the speech. He confronted Camilla the next day, his usually diplomatic demeanor replaced by barely controlled anger. "How dare you use Catherine's illness as an opportunity for self-promotion?" he said, cornering Camilla in the palace corridors. "I was simply fulfilling a duty," Camilla replied coolly. "The monarchy must go on, regardless of personal circumstances." "Surely you understand that." "Don't lecture me about duty," William shot back. "My wife is fighting for her health, and you're using that as a stepping stone for your own ambitions." Camilla's mask slipped slightly, revealing the calculation beneath. "I'm thinking about what's best for the monarchy, William. Perhaps you should be doing the same instead of being blinded by emotion." The confrontation left both of them understanding exactly where they stood. William returned to Catherine, more determined than ever to protect her from the political maneuvering happening around them. But Catherine, despite her illness, was far from naive about what was happening. "She's making her move, isn't she?" Catherine asked one evening as William recounted his conversation with Camilla. They were in their private sitting room at Kensington Palace, a fire crackling in the hearth as they shared a quiet dinner. "I won't let her," William said firmly. "This is your time to focus on getting better, not to worry about palace politics." Catherine smiled sadly. "I appreciate that, darling, but we both know I can't ignore what's happening. If I'm going to fight this illness, I need to also fight for my place in this family and in the monarchy." As the weeks passed, the battle lines became increasingly clear. On one side were William and Catherine, supported by a circle of loyal friends and staff who believed in Catherine's strength and her importance to the royal family's future. On the other side was Camilla, who had begun building her own coalition of supporters who saw her as a more stable, healthier option for the monarchy. The stress of this internal family war began to take its toll on Catherine's already fragile health. The treatments were exhausting, and the knowledge that she was fighting battles on multiple fronts made recovery even more challenging. William watched helplessly as the woman he loved struggled not just with her illness, but with the betrayal of family members who should have been supporting her. One particularly difficult evening, after an especially harsh round of treatment, Catherine collapsed in their bedroom. William found her on the floor, conscious but weak, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was the overwhelming weight of everything she was carrying. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered as William helped her to bed. "The treatment, the politics, watching Camilla circle like a vulture. It's too much." William held her close, feeling the fragility of her body against his. "You don't have to do anything except focus on getting better. I'll handle everything else." But even as he spoke those words, William knew it wasn't that simple. The monarchy was bigger than any individual, and the pressures they were under came from centuries of tradition and expectation. Catherine couldn't simply step back and focus on her health without consequences that would ripple through the entire institution. The next morning brought news that would escalate the conflict to a new level. One of the tabloids had gotten wind of Catherine's condition, though their information was incomplete and largely speculative. The headlines screamed about the future queen's secret health crisis and included quotes from unnamed sources within the palace. William and Catherine both knew immediately where the leak had come from. Only a few people within their inner circle knew the details of Catherine's diagnosis, and the specific information in the article pointed to someone with close access to the royal family. When they investigated further, all signs pointed back to Camilla's camp. "She's trying to force our hand," Catherine said as they read the article together. "If the public knows I'm ill, she can position herself as the responsible choice for succession planning." The article created a media frenzy that the palace struggled to control. Speculation ran wild about Catherine's condition, her prognosis, and what it meant for the future of the monarchy. Photographers camped outside medical facilities, hoping to catch a glimpse of Catherine arriving for treatment. The children had to be given additional security as press attention intensified. Through it all, Camilla maintained a public facade of concern and support. She issued statements about the family pulling together during difficult times and her readiness to take on additional duties to support the monarchy during this period. But privately, she continued her campaign to position herself as Catherine's eventual replacement. The culmination of this first phase of the crisis came during a private family meeting at Windsor Castle. Charles had called the gathering to address the growing tension and to establish some ground rules for how the family would handle Catherine's illness moving forward. The meeting was tense from the beginning. William and Catherine sat together on one side of the ornate conference room, while Camilla positioned herself strategically near Charles. Other senior family members filled out the room, many of them clearly uncomfortable with the obvious divisions. Charles began by expressing his support for Catherine and his confidence in her ability to overcome her health challenges. But Camilla interrupted before he could finish. "While we all hope for Catherine's full recovery," she said, her voice carrying artificial sympathy, "we must also be realistic about planning for various scenarios. The monarchy requires continuity, and the people expect leadership they can depend on." Catherine, despite her weakened state, sat up straighter. "Are you suggesting that I'm no longer capable of providing that leadership?" "I'm simply saying that we need contingency plans," Camilla replied, her tone remaining carefully modulated. "Your health must be your priority, which may mean stepping back from certain responsibilities." "And I suppose you see yourself filling those responsibilities," William interjected, his voice tight with controlled anger. Camilla turned to face him directly. "I see myself serving the monarchy in whatever capacity is needed. That's what being part of this family means." The room fell silent as the implications of the exchange settled over everyone present. This wasn't just about Catherine's health anymore. It was about the fundamental power structure of the royal family and who would control its future direction. Catherine stood slowly, her movement deliberate despite her physical weakness. "I want to make something very clear," she said, addressing the room but looking directly at Camilla. "I am fighting this illness with everything I have, and I am not stepping back from my duties unless absolutely necessary. This family and this monarchy will not be held hostage by opportunistic power grabs disguised as concern." The meeting ended with no clear resolution, but the lines had been drawn publicly within the family. As they left Windsor Castle that day, William helped Catherine to their car, both of them knowing that they were entering a new and more dangerous phase of their struggle. "She's not going to stop," Catherine said quietly as they drove back to London. "Neither are we," William replied, reaching over to take her hand. "We're going to fight this together. On every front." But as their car pulled away from Windsor Castle, neither of them could see Camilla standing at one of the upper windows, watching them leave with an expression of cold determination. The real battle was just beginning. The weeks following the tense family meeting at Windsor Castle marked a turning point in Catherine's battle. Her medical team had developed an aggressive treatment plan that required her to spend several days each week at a private medical facility in London. The treatments were exhausting, leaving her weak and nauseous, but the early signs were encouraging. Her doctors spoke cautiously of progress, of markers moving in the right direction. William rearranged his entire schedule to be with Catherine during these treatments. He would sit beside her hospital bed, reading aloud from books they both enjoyed, or simply holding her hand as the medications flowed through her system. On the worst days, when the treatment made her too sick to speak, he would tell her stories about their children's latest adventures or share memories from their happier times. "Do you remember our first official tour together?" William asked one afternoon as Catherine rested between treatment sessions. "You were so nervous about the speeches, but you were absolutely magnificent. I knew then that you were going to change everything about what it meant to be royal." Catherine smiled weakly. "I was terrified, but you made me feel like I could do anything." Her voice was hoarse from the medication, but her eyes still held the same warmth that had captivated William years before. These quiet moments together strengthened their bond, but they also highlighted how much Catherine's condition had changed their lives. The woman who had once managed multiple royal engagements in a single day now struggled to get through basic treatment sessions without exhaustion. Meanwhile, Camilla was not sitting idle. She had begun what she called her expanded role initiative, taking on engagements that had previously been Catherine's responsibility. At first, this seemed like helpful family support during a difficult time, but gradually it became clear that Camilla was systematically building her own power base within the royal structure. She started by taking over Catherine's patronages, explaining to the organizations that she was stepping in temporarily while Catherine focused on her health. But her approach was different from Catherine's. Where Catherine had brought warmth and genuine connection to her charitable work, Camilla brought efficiency and business-like professionalism. Some organizations appreciated the change, while others missed Catherine's personal touch. The Royal Press Office found itself in an increasingly difficult position. They had to balance protecting Catherine's privacy with managing public expectations about her reduced schedule. Camilla's expanded role made this even more complicated, as her increased visibility inevitably invited comparisons with the absent Catherine. "Your Majesty," the press secretary said during a particularly tense briefing with Charles, "the media is starting to ask direct questions about succession planning. They want to know if the Duchess of Cornwall's increased role indicates a permanent shift in responsibilities." Charles looked uncomfortable. He had been trying to stay above the family politics, but the pressure was mounting from multiple directions. "How do we respond to those questions?" "Honestly, sir, I'm not sure. We need clear guidance from the family about how to handle this situation moving forward." The children were also feeling the strain of the ongoing crisis. George, at his age, understood more than his parents realized about what was happening. He had overheard conversations about his mother's illness and noticed how different their family life had become. The younger children sensed the tension but couldn't fully comprehend its source. One evening, George approached William in his study. "Papa, is Mama going to be okay?" William set aside his work and pulled his eldest son into a chair beside him. "Mama is very sick, George, but she's getting the best treatment possible. The doctors are helping her get better." "But what if she doesn't get better?" George asked, his young voice carrying a maturity that broke William's heart. "Then we'll face whatever comes together as a family," William replied honestly. "But right now, we're focusing on helping Mama get strong again." George nodded solemnly. "Some people at school are saying things about our family, about Camilla becoming more important than Mama." William felt a surge of anger that children were being exposed to the adult politics of succession. "What people say outside our family doesn't matter, George. What matters is that we love Mama and we're supporting her in every way we can." But even as William tried to shield his children from the controversy, he knew that the situation was becoming unsustainable. The media speculation was intensifying, and Camilla's actions were becoming increasingly bold. The breaking point came during a state dinner that Catherine had been scheduled to host. She had been looking forward to the event, seeing it as a chance to prove that she could still fulfill her major royal duties despite her treatment. However, 2 days before the dinner, a particularly harsh round of treatment left her too weak to attend. Camilla stepped in as hostess, and what should have been a simple substitution became something much more significant. She used her speech at the dinner to outline her vision for the monarchy's future, speaking about adapting to changing circumstances and ensuring continuity through challenging times. The speech was widely reported, and the subtext was clear to anyone following the royal family closely. Camilla was no longer simply filling in for Catherine. She was actively positioning herself as the future leader of royal family initiatives. William was at the hospital with Catherine when news of the speech reached them. Catherine was recovering from her latest treatment, still pale and weak, but alert enough to understand the implications of what had happened. "She hosted my state dinner," Catherine said quietly, staring at the news coverage on William's phone. "The one I've been planning for months." "The planning will still be yours when you're well enough to host again," William said, trying to reassure her. But Catherine shook her head. "You don't understand, William. She's not just taking over my duties temporarily. She's taking over my role permanently. Every day I'm in this hospital bed, every public appearance she makes in my place, she's building the case that she's the better choice for the monarchy's future." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the hospital room door. Charles entered, looking haggard and older than William had ever seen him. He approached Catherine's bedside with obvious concern, but there was also something else in his expression that William couldn't quite identify. "Catherine, my dear, I wanted to check on how you're feeling," Charles said, his voice gentle but formal. "I'm managing, thank you," Catherine replied, "though I understand Camilla had to step in for the state dinner." "I hope it went well." Charles looked uncomfortable. "It did go well. Very well, actually. The ambassadors were quite impressed with her presentation." "I'm sure they were," Catherine said, and William could hear the edge in his wife's voice, despite her weakened state. Charles sat down in the chair opposite William. "I think we need to have an honest conversation about the coming months. Your treatment is going to be lengthy, and the demands of royal duty don't pause for personal circumstances." "What are you saying, Father?" William asked, though he suspected he knew where this conversation was heading. "I'm saying that we need to formalize some of these temporary arrangements, give Camilla official status for some of the roles she's been filling informally." Catherine struggled to sit up straighter in her hospital bed. "You want to officially transfer my duties to Camilla while I'm fighting for my life?" "Not transfer," Charles said quickly. "Delegate, temporarily." "There's nothing temporary about what she's doing. William said, his voice rising with anger. She's systematically taking over Catherine's role, and now you want to make it official? Charles looked between his son and daughter-in-law, the weight of his position as both king and father evident in his expression. I'm trying to do what's best for the monarchy. The institution must continue to function effectively. And what about what's best for your family? Catherine asked. What about supporting a family member who's facing the fight of her life? The room fell silent as the three of them grappled with the competing demands of personal loyalty and institutional responsibility. Charles had built his life around service to the crown, but now that dedication was putting him in direct conflict with his family. I need time to think about this, Charles said finally, standing to leave. But Catherine, you must understand that if your treatment continues for many more months, we'll have to consider making some of these arrangements more permanent. After Charles left, William and Catherine sat in stunned silence. The threat was now explicit. Recover quickly, or lose your place in the royal hierarchy permanently. He's choosing the monarchy over family, Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's being manipulated by Camilla, William replied. She's convinced him that this is about institutional stability rather than personal ambition. Over the following days, Catherine's determination seemed to grow stronger even as her body remained weak from treatment. She began insisting on participating in royal duties remotely, attending meetings via video conference, and reviewing documents from her hospital bed. You need to rest, William urged her after a particularly long day of virtual engagements. I need to fight, Catherine replied. Not just the illness, but for my place in this family and this institution. If I show any weakness now, Camilla will use it as evidence that she should take over permanently. The medical team was concerned about the stress that the family politics was adding to Catherine's recovery. Her primary physician pulled William aside after one of her treatment sessions. Your wife's determination is admirable. But the stress from these family conflicts is affecting her healing, the doctor said. Her body needs to focus its energy on fighting the illness, not on fighting political battles. William found himself caught between wanting to protect Catherine from the stress and respecting her need to maintain her position. What do you recommend? Honestly, a complete break from royal duties and family politics for at least a month. Let her body heal without the additional burden of institutional pressure. But when William suggested this to Catherine, her reaction was immediate and firm. A month away gives Camilla a month to solidify her position. I can't afford that kind of absence right now. The situation reached a new level of tension when Camilla made her next strategic move. She announced that she was establishing a new charitable foundation focused on supporting families through health crises. The irony was not lost on anyone. She was creating an organization dedicated to helping families like William and Catherine while simultaneously undermining Catherine's position within their own family. The foundation's launch event was scheduled for the same day as one of Catherine's major treatment sessions. Camilla had timed it perfectly to ensure maximum media coverage, while Catherine would be unavailable to respond or participate. She's mocking us, William said as he read the invitation to the foundation launch. Creating a charity about supporting families through health crises while she's destroying our family during our health crisis. Catherine looked at the invitation with a mixture of anger and grudging admiration for Camilla's strategic thinking. She's smart. I'll give her that. The media will love this. The devoted stepmother-in-law stepping up to help others while the family faces its own challenges. The launch event was everything Camilla had hoped for. The media coverage was extensive and positive, praising her compassion and leadership during difficult times. Several prominent figures attended and spoke about the importance of family support during health crises, seemingly oblivious to the irony of the situation. William watched the coverage from Catherine's hospital room, his anger building with each positive comment about Camilla's dedication and service. How can they not see what she's really doing? Because she's very good at this, Catherine replied weakly. She had just finished a particularly difficult treatment session and was struggling to stay alert. She understands public relations better than any of us gave her credit for. The foundation launch marked the beginning of what the media started calling Camilla's ascendancy. Suddenly, she was everywhere, hosting events, giving interviews, and positioning herself as the steady, reliable presence within the royal family during uncertain times. The contrast with Catherine, who was mostly absent from public view due to her treatment, became increasingly stark. Photos of Camilla looking vibrant and engaged at various events appeared alongside older photos of Catherine looking tired and thin at her last public appearances. "The narrative is shifting," Catherine's private secretary warned during one of their remote meetings. "The public is starting to see Camilla as the future of royal leadership, while you're being seen as someone whose time may have passed." Catherine closed her eyes, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her. The treatment was working. Her doctors continued to report positive progress. But the political battle was exhausting her in ways that the illness alone never could. "What do you recommend?" she asked. "We need to get you back in public view as soon as possible, even if it's just for brief appearances. The public needs to see that you're still fighting, still engaged, still the Catherine they fell in love with." William overheard this conversation and felt torn between his roles as husband and future king. As a husband, he wanted Catherine to focus entirely on her recovery. As a future monarch, he understood that their position within the royal hierarchy was genuinely at risk if they didn't respond to Camilla's challenge. The decision was made for them when Catherine's medical team cleared her for limited public appearances. She was still undergoing treatment, but her response to the therapy had been strong enough that she could manage short public engagements with proper support. Her first appearance back was at a children's hospital that had been one of her longtime patronages. The symbolism was powerful. Catherine, fighting her own health battle, returning to support sick children and their families. The media response was immediate and emotional. Photos of Catherine, visibly thinner but with her characteristic warmth intact, speaking with young patients and their families, dominated the front pages. The public outpouring of support was overwhelming, with thousands of messages flooding social media expressing admiration for her courage and dedication. But even this triumph was complicated by the family dynamics. Camilla's response to Catherine's return was carefully calculated. She issued a public statement praising Catherine's brave return to duty, while subtly noting her own continued commitment to filling any gaps in the royal schedule. The statement walked a careful line between appearing supportive and maintaining her own position as an indispensable backup. It was a masterclass in political positioning that left Catherine and William both impressed and frustrated. "She's good at this game," Catherine admitted as they read Camilla's statement together. "She knows exactly how to maintain her position without appearing overtly hostile." "Too good," William replied, "which makes her dangerous." As Catherine gradually increased her public appearances, the battle between her and Camilla became less about direct confrontation and more about subtle positioning and public perception. Both women were accomplished at the art of royal diplomacy, but now they were using those skills against each other rather than in service of the monarchy. The stress of this ongoing conflict began to show in ways beyond Catherine's health. William, caught between supporting his wife and managing the broader implications for the monarchy, started to show signs of strain. His public appearances became more formal, less spontaneous, as he worked to maintain a united front while dealing with the family division. The children, despite their parents' efforts to shield them, began to understand that something fundamental had changed in their family dynamics. George, in particular, became more protective of his mother and more suspicious of family gatherings where Camilla was present. One evening, after a particularly tense family dinner where Camilla had dominated the conversation about future royal initiatives, George approached Catherine as she was preparing for bed. "Mama, why doesn't Camilla like you?" he asked, with the direct honesty that only children possess. Catherine paused in her nightly routine, considering how to answer honestly without burdening her son with adult conflicts. "Sometimes, George, adults disagree about important things, even within families. But she's supposed to help you when you're sick, isn't she? That's what families do." The innocent observation cut directly to the heart of Catherine's pain. "Yes, darling. That is what families are supposed to do." As Catherine continued her treatment and gradual return to public duties, the question of succession and family loyalty remained unresolved. Camilla had successfully established herself as a major force within the royal family, but Catherine had proven that she was far from ready to surrender her position. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would determine not just Catherine's place within the monarchy, but the very nature of what it meant to be part of the royal family during times of crisis. Both women understood that the coming months would be decisive, and neither was prepared to back down from the fight that would shape the future of the crown. The autumn of Catherine's treatment brought with it a sense of urgency that everyone in the royal family could feel. Her doctors had been cautiously optimistic about her progress, but the treatment protocol was entering its most critical phase. The next few months would determine whether the aggressive therapy would lead to a full recovery or if more drastic measures would be necessary. Catherine had been managing a careful balance between her medical needs and her royal duties, making strategic public appearances that demonstrated her continued commitment while conserving her energy for treatment. But this delicate equilibrium was about to be disrupted by events that would force a final reckoning within the royal family. The catalyst came in the form of a major constitutional crisis that required immediate royal attention. A political scandal had erupted involving the Prime Minister, and there were calls for direct royal intervention to help stabilize the government. It was exactly the kind of situation that demanded the full attention and expertise of the senior royals. Charles called an emergency family meeting to discuss how to handle the crisis. The meeting was scheduled for the same day that Catherine was due to receive one of her most important treatments, a session that her doctors had stressed could not be delayed without potentially compromising her entire recovery. "I can't miss this treatment," Catherine told William as they discussed the timing conflict. "Dr. Harrison was very clear that the sequence can't be interrupted at this stage." "Then we'll attend the meeting via video conference," William replied. "Father will have to understand that your health takes priority." But when William called to explain the situation, Charles's response was not what they had hoped for. "This is a constitutional crisis, William. I need all senior family members present in person. Surely Catherine's treatment can be rescheduled by a day or two." "No, it can't," William said firmly. "The medical team has been very clear about the timing requirements." There was a long pause before Charles responded. "Then perhaps Camilla should take the lead on this situation. She's been handling similar responsibilities very effectively." The implication was clear. If Catherine couldn't fulfill her duties during a crisis, then Camilla would be positioned as the more reliable alternative. William realized that this was not just about a scheduling conflict. It was a test that Camilla had likely orchestrated. "This is exactly what she's been waiting for," Catherine said when William explained the situation. She was lying in their bed, preparing mentally for the next day's treatment, but her mind was sharp and focused on the political implications. "You think she knew about the treatment schedule when she advised Father to call the meeting for tomorrow?" "I'm certain of it. She has access to Father's calendar, and she's been paying very close attention to my medical schedule. This is too convenient to be coincidental." William felt a surge of protective anger. "Then we'll prove that you can handle both. We'll find a way to make this work without compromising your treatment." But Catherine shook her head. "No, William. If I try to do both, I'll do neither well. The treatment will be less effective if I'm stressed and distracted, and I won't be at my sharpest for the constitutional discussions." "So what do we do?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment. staring at the ceiling as she worked through the political calculations. "We call her bluff. I go to the treatment as scheduled, and you handle the family meeting. Force them to proceed without me and see how well Camilla actually performs under real pressure." It was a risky strategy. By choosing her health over the family meeting, Catherine was potentially giving Camilla exactly what she wanted, an opportunity to prove herself indispensable during a crisis. But Catherine had realized that trying to compete with Camilla on Camilla's terms would be a losing battle. The next morning, as Catherine underwent her treatment, the royal family gathered at Buckingham Palace to address the constitutional crisis. William arrived alone, prepared to represent both himself and Catherine in the discussions. Camilla was in her element, having spent the previous evening preparing detailed briefings and position papers. She had consulted with constitutional experts, reviewed historical precedents, and developed what she believed was a comprehensive response strategy. Given the sensitive nature of this situation, Camilla began as the meeting commenced, "I've taken the liberty of preparing some recommendations for how the monarchy should respond." She presented her analysis with confidence and authority, demonstrating a command of constitutional law that surprised even Charles. Her recommendations were thoughtful and well-researched, showing that she had indeed taken her expanded role seriously. But as the discussion progressed, William began to notice something that others in the room missed. Camilla's approach, while competent, lacked the nuanced understanding of public sentiment that Catherine always brought to these situations. She was focused on the legal and procedural aspects, but missing the human element that was crucial for royal intervention in political crises. "Your analysis is thorough," William said when Camilla finished her presentation, "but I think we need to consider the public's emotional response to royal involvement. This isn't just about constitutional precedent. It's about maintaining public trust in both the monarchy and the democratic process." William then presented Catherine's perspective, which she had shared with him during their preparation the night before. Catherine had focused on the delicate balance between royal authority and democratic governance, understanding that the monarchy's response would set important precedents for future crises. The contrast between the two approaches became increasingly clear as the discussion continued. Camilla's recommendations, while legally sound, were politically tone-deaf. Catherine's insights, presented through William, demonstrated a deeper understanding of the monarchy's role in modern Britain. Charles found himself in the uncomfortable position of watching his wife and his son present competing visions for how the royal family should handle the crisis. As the meeting progressed, it became evident that Catherine's approach, despite her physical absence, was more sophisticated and politically astute. The turning point came when the Prime Minister's office called during the meeting, requesting an immediate royal response to help calm public concerns. Charles looked around the room, uncertain about how to proceed. "I'll handle it," Camilla said, reaching for the phone. But William intervened. "Actually, I think Catherine should take this call. She's been following the situation closely, and her understanding of the public mood would be valuable here." "Catherine isn't here," Camilla pointed out sharply. "No, but she's available by phone, and she's been thinking about this issue for weeks." The room fell silent as everyone realized that this moment would effectively decide who was considered the senior royal voice on constitutional matters. Charles hesitated, caught between his wife's obvious preparation and his recognition of Catherine's superior political instincts. "Call Catherine," he said finally. When Catherine took the call, even through the phone line, her authority was unmistakable. Despite being weakened by treatment, her voice was clear and confident as she provided guidance that was both constitutionally appropriate and politically sensitive. After the call ended, the room was quiet. Camilla's face showed barely controlled frustration, while Charles looked thoughtful. William felt a surge of pride in his wife, who had managed to demonstrate her indispensability even while fighting for her life. But the real test was yet to come. Over the following weeks, as the political crisis continued to unfold, both Catherine and Camilla found themselves playing prominent roles in the royal response. Catherine, despite her ongoing treatment, provided strategic guidance and occasionally appeared in public to demonstrate royal stability. Camilla managed many of the logistical aspects and handled numerous routine engagements. The public began to see both women in action, and the contrast in their approaches became increasingly apparent. Catherine's appearances, though less frequent, carried more weight and generated more positive public response. Her obvious fragility, combined with her unwavering commitment to duty, created a powerful narrative of courage and dedication. Camilla, meanwhile, began to show signs of strain under the increased scrutiny. Her every action was compared to Catherine's, and the comparison was not always favorable. The public, who had initially been sympathetic to her expanded role during Catherine's illness, began to question whether she was trying to replace Catherine rather than support her. The media narrative started to shift as well. What had initially been portrayed as a helpful family member stepping up during a crisis began to be characterized as a power grab that was adding stress to an already difficult situation. The climax of the conflict came during a state visit that required the full engagement of the senior royals. Catherine's doctors had initially advised against her participation, but she insisted that this was too important to miss. The visit would demonstrate whether she could still fulfill the demanding requirements of her future role as queen. Camilla, recognizing the significance of this moment, also prepared extensively for the visit. She understood that this would likely be the final test of whether she could establish herself as Catherine's equal within the royal hierarchy. The first day of the state visit went smoothly, with both women handling their respective responsibilities professionally. But by the second day, the physical demands began to take their toll on Catherine. She had scheduled her latest treatment for the morning before the state dinner, hoping to manage both commitments. William found her in their private suite an hour before the dinner, sitting at her dressing table but clearly struggling. Her hands were shaking as she tried to put on her jewelry, and her face was pale with exhaustion. "Catherine, you don't have to do this tonight," he said, moving to help her with the necklace. "Yes, I do," she replied quietly. "If I don't appear at this dinner, if I let Camilla host another major event in my place, it will be seen as confirmation that I can't handle the demands of my role. Your health is more important than any state dinner." Catherine turned to face him, and William could see the determination in her eyes despite her obvious fatigue. "My health and my role as your wife and future queen are not separate things, William. If I lose one, I lose the other." They were interrupted by a knock on the door. Catherine's lady-in-waiting entered with an urgent message. "Your Royal Highness, there's been a problem with the seating arrangements for tonight's dinner. The protocol office needs immediate guidance." It was exactly the kind of detailed, high-pressure decision that required the kind of diplomatic finesse that Catherine excelled at. But in her current state, the task seemed overwhelming. "I'll handle it," came a voice from the doorway. Camilla had arrived, dressed and ready for the evening, looking vibrant and capable. "No," Catherine said firmly, struggling to stand. "I'll handle it." What followed was a scene that would later be seen as the decisive moment in their conflict. Catherine, despite her obvious weakness, worked through the complex protocol issues with the clarity and expertise that had made her invaluable to the royal family. Camilla stood by, ready to step in, but ultimately unnecessary. When Catherine finished resolving the seating crisis, she turned to Camilla with a look of exhausted triumph. "I believe that's handled." The state dinner itself became a testament to Catherine's resilience and skill. Despite her physical challenges, she navigated the complex diplomatic requirements with grace and authority. Foreign dignitaries specifically sought her out for conversations, recognizing her influence and expertise. Camilla, by contrast, found herself somewhat marginalized during the event. While she performed her duties adequately, it was clear that Catherine remained the central figure in royal diplomacy, illness or no illness. The final confrontation between the two women came late that night, after the dinner had ended and the guests had departed. Catherine had retreated to a private sitting room to rest, her energy completely depleted by the evening's demands. William had gone to check on arrangements for the next day's events, leaving Catherine alone. Camilla found her there, slumped in an armchair. Still wearing her evening gown, but with her shoes kicked off and her jewelry scattered on a nearby table. For the first time in months, Catherine looked genuinely defeated. "That was quite a performance tonight," Camilla said, entering the room uninvited. Catherine opened her eyes but didn't move to sit up straighter. "I'm sorry? The way you insisted on handling everything yourself, despite being obviously unwell, it was very dedicated." There was something in Camilla's tone that was different from her usual calculated politeness. For the first time, her mask of concern was slipping, revealing the frustration and ambition beneath. "I was doing my job," Catherine replied simply. "Your job?" Camilla laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your job is to get better and let the rest of us manage the monarchy's responsibilities." Catherine slowly sat up straighter, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she still possessed. "My job is to serve the crown and the people, regardless of my personal circumstances." "How noble," Camilla said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "But how practical is it to sacrifice your health for the sake of maintaining control?" The word control hung in the air between them, finally making explicit what this conflict had always been about. "Is that what you think this is about?" Catherine asked. "Control? Isn't it? You refuse to step back, even temporarily, because you're afraid that I might prove myself capable of handling your responsibilities." Catherine studied Camilla's face, seeing clearly for the first time the ambition that had been driving all of her actions over the past months. "You really believe that, don't you? That this is just about who gets to be in charge? Isn't it?" Catherine struggled to her feet, standing on unsteady legs, but with unmistakable dignity. "No, Camilla, it's about something much more important than that." She moved to the window, looking out at the palace gardens that she had walked through on so many peaceful evenings before her illness changed everything. "This is about what it means to serve something larger than yourself. About understanding that being royal isn't about the titles, or the power, or the public attention. It's about the weight of responsibility that you carry every single day, whether you're healthy or sick, whether you're popular or criticized, whether it's convenient or not." Catherine turned back to face Camilla, and despite her physical weakness, her presence filled the room. "You've spent months positioning yourself as my replacement, thinking that royal duty is something you can just step into and perform. But you're missing the most important part. It's not about being able to do the job. It's about understanding what the job costs and choosing to pay that price anyway." Camilla stared at her, and for a moment her confident facade wavered. "I've been doing the work," Camilla said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "You've been doing activities," Catherine corrected, "but you haven't been carrying the weight. You haven't felt the responsibility in your bones, the way it changes how you see every decision, every word, every public moment." Catherine moved closer to Camilla, and despite her illness, there was something formidable about her presence. "Tonight, when that protocol crisis arose, your first instinct was to see it as an opportunity to prove yourself. My first instinct was to see it as a problem that needed solving for the good of the monarchy and our guests. That difference, that's what you'll never understand." The room was silent as both women faced each other, the months of subtle warfare finally culminating in this moment of complete honesty. "You want to know why I won't step aside?" Catherine continued. "It's not because I'm afraid you'll do well. It's because I'm afraid you'll think that doing well is enough. Camilla's composure finally cracked. How dare you lecture me about dedication when you've spent months in and out of hospitals, instead of fulfilling your duties? Because even in those hospital beds, I never stopped thinking about what my illness meant for the people who depend on this institution. I never stopped worrying about the children who look up to the royal family, or the charities that need our support, or the constitutional role we play in people's lives. Catherine's voice grew stronger as she continued, fed by months of suppressed frustration and disappointment. You saw my illness as an opportunity. I saw it as an obstacle to overcome in service of something larger than myself. That's the difference between us, and that's why, no matter how capable you prove yourself to be, you'll never be ready for the role you're trying to claim. Camilla stood frozen, finally understanding that she had not just been competing with Catherine for a position within the royal hierarchy, she had been competing with an entirely different conception of what that position meant. I've been trying to help this family through a difficult time, Camilla said, but her voice was small and defensive. No, Catherine replied sadly. You've been trying to advance yourself during our difficult time. And the fact that you can't see the difference is exactly why you're not ready for the responsibilities you're seeking. The conversation was interrupted by William's return. He entered the room to find both women facing each other in tense silence, the air thick with unspoken truths finally brought into the light. Is everything all right? He asked, looking between his wife and stepmother. Catherine turned to him with a sad smile. I think everything is finally clear. Over the following weeks, the dynamic within the royal family shifted dramatically. Camilla, shaken by her confrontation with Catherine, began to step back from the expanded role she had been building. The experience had forced her to confront the reality that royal duty required a depth of commitment that she had not fully understood. Charles, observing the change in his wife's behavior, gradually came to understand what had been happening within his family. The realization that Camilla had been advancing her own position during Catherine's illness filled him with shame and regret. I've failed you both, he told William during a private conversation. I should have seen what was happening and protected Catherine instead of enabling Camilla's ambitions. You were trying to balance family loyalty with institutional needs, William replied, though the strain of the past months was evident in his voice. It's an impossible position. No excuse, Charles said firmly. Family comes first, especially when family is suffering. Catherine's treatment continued for several more months, but without the additional stress of fighting for her position within the royal family, her recovery accelerated. Her doctors attributed the improvement partly to the reduced psychological pressure, noting that stress had been one of the factors slowing her healing. As Catherine regained her strength, she gradually resumed her full range of royal duties. But the experience had changed her, deepening her understanding of both her role and the people around her. Camilla, meanwhile, found a new equilibrium within the family structure. She continued to support royal activities, but in a supporting rather than leading role. The experience had humbled her, forcing her to confront the difference between wanting power and being ready for responsibility. The real resolution came during the Christmas broadcast that year. Catherine, now clearly on the path to full recovery, appeared beside William as they spoke about resilience, family support, and the importance of facing challenges together. This year has taught us that strength isn't about avoiding difficulties, Catherine said, looking directly into the camera. It's about how we support each other through them, and how we use those experiences to better serve others facing similar challenges. Watching the broadcast from another room in the palace, Camilla finally understood what Catherine had been trying to tell her. Royal duty wasn't about personal achievement or public recognition. It was about service that continued regardless of personal cost, and about finding strength not in individual accomplishment, but in collective purpose. The crisis had tested every relationship within the royal family, but ultimately it had also clarified what those relationships should be based on. Catherine's illness had revealed not just her own strength, but the difference between those who saw royal responsibility as an opportunity and those who understood it as a calling. In the months that followed, Catherine's recovery continued steadily. She returned to her full schedule of royal engagements, but with a new perspective on what truly mattered. The experience had stripped away any illusions about the glamour of royal life, leaving behind only the essential core of service and duty. William, watching his wife regain her strength and authority, felt a deep pride in how she had handled the crisis. She had faced challenges to both her health and her position with equal grace, never compromising her values even when it would have been easier to do so. The royal family, tested by crisis, had emerged with a clearer understanding of their purpose and their relationships to each other. Catherine's illness had been a tragedy, but it had also been a revelation, showing who they truly were when everything else was stripped away. As Catherine stood at the same window where she had first read her medical diagnosis, now more than a year later, she reflected on everything that had changed. Her health was restored, her position was secure, and her understanding of her role had been deepened by the trial she had endured. William joined her at the window, as he had so many times during her illness. "Any regrets about how we handled everything?" Catherine considered the question carefully. "I regret that it took a crisis to reveal some uncomfortable truths about our family, but I don't regret fighting for what I believed in. Even when it made your recovery harder?" "Especially then," Catherine replied, "because that's when it mattered most." They stood together in comfortable silence, both understanding that they had not just survived a crisis, but had been strengthened by it. The challenges had tested their marriage, their values, and their commitment to their roles, and they had emerged with a deeper appreciation for all three. Outside their window, the palace gardens were preparing for spring, showing new growth after the long winter. It seemed like an appropriate metaphor for their family, their marriage, and the monarchy itself, tested by harsh seasons but ultimately renewed by the experience. Catherine placed her hand on William's arm, feeling the solid strength that had sustained her through the darkest moments of her illness and the political battles that followed. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." "Always," William replied, understanding that they had proven this commitment in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. As evening fell over the palace, they remained at the window, watching the lights come on across London. Somewhere in the city were the people they served, the individuals whose lives were touched by the institution they represented. It was for them, ultimately, that Catherine had fought so hard to maintain her role and her health. The crisis was over, but the responsibility continued. And that, Catherine had learned, was exactly as it should be.